in line with what the rest of the civilized world is doing at the moment to check the ravages of coronavirus. Much of Africa is under different stages of lockdown. But of what use is this to a continent which, despite our enormous human and material potential, still lags behind in terms of how these resources are being used to improve the lives of the people? And now economic experts are saying it should be time for administrators on the continent to move on and allow the people engage in meaningful, productive activities because of the inevitable hardship that will follow. To get a proper handle on this, we are now being joined by Professor Charles Soludo, member Presidential Economic Advisory Council and a former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Professor Soludo was also economic advisor to former President Olusegun Obasanjo. Professor Soludo, good morning and welcome to the morning show.
Welcome to the program, Professor. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Yes. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Well, I mean, I read your article, COVID-19, Can Africa Afford Lockdowns, in which you painted a very grim picture on the impact of copying the lockdowns employed by the West to stem the spread of COVID-19. But while offering practical solutions, social solutions, you stop short of providing specific economic measures that policymakers in Africa can adopt. Now, what measures do you think that African countries should adopt, and Nigeria in particular, in terms of how to manage the economy, both now and post-COVID-19?
Thank you very much, Ruben, and it's really a pleasure having me to be with you this morning. Let me just say that, first of all, you referred to the article. That was just my own humble, if you like, personal, innocent personal opinion on what's going on in Africa. I'm very surprised by the interest in responses directly from about 16 countries. Quite surprising to me, actually, because that was an innocent item. Yours is a short question, but requires a very long answer. But let me clarify that the purpose of the article itself, by its title, was to answer a simple question. Can Africa afford the lockdowns? And not, the purpose wasn't actually to write detailed economic blueprint, 54 individual African countries. I think that's an onerous task to book and to do that. And so our goal in that piece was simply to like some kind of and to encourage debate, disruptive. Africa shouldn't have self-doubt. We should take our destiny in our own hands and have some smart African solutions, not to do stupid things. We should listen to WHO and all of that, but at the same time, have some critical disruptive thinkers that also think through the solutions vis-a-vis the realities, the social and the economic realities of Africa. That was just the whole idea of that piece, that we don't just take one, because the conventional solutions might actually be killing more people than actually the actual disease itself. And but back to your question, 54 African countries are as diverse as they are similar, and therefore it will be difficult to write one or set of solutions. I suggested in the article that the various economic need to go to work. What will happen in the aggregate Africa? In the aggregate will depend on what will happen in what I call the P3, Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt, for example. I serve on the PSC, as you said in your introduction, and there are various committees you wanted to hear about Nigeria. There are various committees that have been set up by the president. There is the Economic Sustainability Committee headed by the Vice President. He's just announced a committee of 10 ministers. They're also working on that. Of course, the PSC, the Economic President, we're also making inputs into that. And as you would understand, can begin to discuss those. Yeah. As advisors, we merely send our own input confidentially to the president and to the authorities. What they do with that, it's up to them. I wouldn't be discussing those.
Professor, thank you. A great article, I must add. Now, as you are aware, the pandemic has really led to a tectonic shift in countries that are really willing to do business with China. The U.S. is encouraging its companies to pull out of China. Japan have even announced a $1 trillion package to aid companies and help them to pull out of China. Now, this presents a unique opportunity for Africa, or do you think, rather, that this presents a unique opportunity for Africa for us to attract some of these companies to come into the continent? And if so, do we also have the capacity to do so, and how should we start going around this?
Oh, thank you very much. I think it really sounds funny and ironical at the same time. And points to some of the deeper contradictions as multilateralism is receding in the world and crude mercantilism, the rise. This now seems to be everyone. And obviously the world is going to suffer for lack of a coordinated response. When I say funny and ironical, was a crisis in the U.S. financial system, plunged the global economy into unprecedented financial and economic crisis since the Great Depression, what is now called the Great Recession. I can't remember whether the world had to boycott the U.S. financial. It's a consequence of that. That's the world's largest economy. And now people are talking about gain, unquote. But every now and again, commodity prices that affect African countries also collapse on account of actions of one or some of the major players. And no one ever raised any issue. So why China? Why now? And a central point I want to emphasize, now get to your question, is that we have to ensure that we have same standards of international engagement. Now, let's face it, can the world actually boycott? Maybe, but it will be very difficult, almost impossible. China, big and sophisticated an economy to plate in the day. The second largest economy in nominal terms, in dollar terms, $15 trillion economy. Actually, the largest economy, and it has cash with over $3 trillion in very low cost producer, efficient infrastructure, highly productive labor force. And in the end, my dear, is going to come down for the rest of the world.
Hello, Professor
to
Soludo.
hard-nosing.
Professor
Yes.
Soludo, sorry to interrupt you, but could you please adjust your audio a bit? It keeps going off and on.
I hope you hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I was talking about the fact at the end of the day, for the rest of the world, it will come down to hard-nosed economic decisions. It's not going to be about sentiments. I mean, these things will fizzle out at the end of the day. We are part of the multilateral rules will still come in, and never mind the temporary setbacks. But Africa can take advantage of what is the other countries that, into light manufacturers, but where the average real wage is actually rising now, and so they are losing their competitive advantage. But Africa, for us to be able to do that, you need great infrastructure and low effective labor wage plus technology. Three things have to be there. Nations that have got them, they will be able to attract more. But if Africa ramps up on the continental free trade area arrangement, and I think creating almost like a common market, then the $2.6 trillion African economy will become a very, very attractive proposition for the flying geese, as it were. That's coming to take advantage of it. So Africa might have to ramp up very quickly the implementation of the continental free trade thing. And then for the firms in Africa is where they can opportunistic. Because over time, the whole idea of taking advantage of low production might be obviated by, 3D printing augmented by artificial intelligence that will actually make location-specific production costs, much, much lower. So comparative advantages in terms of these costs might begin to be flawed significant. So my point is that, yes, China, there is a noise today about China, but I think it will fizzle out. China is too big. Africa, able to do anything. It will fix our infrastructure and have competitive advantage with respect to the rest of the world. No free lunch. They're not going to come here simply because going out of China. Going out of China, there is also East Asia. Specifically that you use as an example.
Well, Professor Soludo, I would like to ask you two follow-up questions on the issues you have addressed so far. The first one, it has to do with lockdown. And I'm quoting directly from the front page story of This Day in Nigeria Today. And the front page story, the lead story in This Day says, federal government's dilemma. Can lockdown ease amidst rising deaths and spread of COVID-19? Because the numbers in terms of the death rate seems to be going up. That's the first follow-up question. Then a second follow-up question. I'd like to refer you to an article written by your former colleague, Obi Ezekwesili, in the Washington Post recently, in which he was saying that China has to pay reparation to Africa for its coronavirus failures. Do you share that view, or you think that, that will amount to stigmatizing China? Those are the two follow-up questions.
Well, thank you very much. One of my sisters I think it's a very great idea. If we can begin to get I actually alluded partly to it in my previous response, namely that, yes, the U.S. was the first one, the biggest economy in the world, that plunged the world into the Great Recession, costing the global economy trillions of dollars. We haven't held them to the same standard. It will be quite a great idea, and I take the central thesis she has there, and which is that they will begin to hold countries which plunge cause incalculable harm to the rest of the world, to account and to have some recompense to the rest of the world. That will be a new world order. But all I'm trying to say is that so far, US did it, at least recently, gargantuan proportions. Nobody talks about it. And it's why do we begin with China? And I'm sure if I am a Chinese, that would be my question. But is it a fair thing from the developing countries? It would be. Whether you're talking and the other follow-up, or they think it's rising, infections are rising, come down to that question maybe differently, maybe in the course of this interview. But the numbers will continue to. That's part of what I pointed out in my piece, is the exit strategy, this lockdown scenario. Is it that you keep locking down until the numbers fall, or that you then what you call flattening the curve? You continue to do that in a type of society. I don't see, early at the beginning. Question is, for how long are you going to lock up 1 billion people? No food. I was just watching the segment on your earlier part of the interview, and where people were saying they were going hungry and so on and so forth. For how long? If you have an exit strategy, it after 6 weeks, after 1 month, or until it stops rising. If your strategy, exit strategy, is until it stops rising, are in for a long wait. Why? Because Africa don't have the capacity to test. New York is still begging for resources to test. And unless you test, you don't know. The Africans get to hospital as last resort. Probably the only ones that we're hearing reported are the ones that are already in the severe condition. But by the way, 80% of the infections are mild and have no, or probably have no symptoms. So probably less than 20%, in fact, 15% are severe, only 5% are critical. So probably what we're seeing in much of it is the 5% that are critical. So we don't have the 80% that are asymptomatic or that don't show any symptoms, as the case may be, or that will get over it anywhere. So there is also, it's not said in those numbers, as the fact that as a result of the lockdown, is what I'm learning from health economists and public health officials, I mean experts, is the connection between nutrition and health, between poverty and health. What we don't hear, we hear of the number of infections, I mean the COVID-19, at least those who have reported. What we don't hear are the thousands of people that are dying every day. The result of malaria. Nigeria has about 100 million cases of malaria every year, with over 300,000 deaths a year. That's almost 1,000 a day. 1,000 persons dying per day for malaria. HIV, almost deaths per year. So between just HIV and malaria, Nigeria alone has over 500,000 people dying a year. With the lockdown, I'm not trying to use Nigeria, and people have no food, their immune system goes down. They are more susceptible to health challenges and death. Probably more people are now dying of malaria and these other diseases than the counterfactual. So my point is not, oh, because it is rising. If it is right, because it is rising, then you say, okay, you lock down. Thousands that are actually dying as other consequences, as compared to the other strategies of trying to build a halfway house. You can't afford the lockdown, you can't pay them to feed well and stay at home. And then more people will die as a consequence of that. And what do you do, the interim, to also stem spread of the virus? That is the dilemma that Africa faces. And let's not pretend that it is a very binary choice. You just do A, B, C, D, and that you can't afford. I'm not sure that's going to work.
Well, Prof, I get your point about exit strategy, because even that is part of the conversation in the UK. But I need you to still help us clarify something. Can there be economic growth when people are dying?
Let's put it this way. Not when people are dying. Very interesting point. Me say, actually, nobody wants anybody. Every life is so important, and Africa must do everything for everyone. Governments who did the rational thing by the first thing you will see, if you see people running away, you just run. But after two this thing, then you wait. My thesis, and that is the point, is that Africa may be afraid of death, but end up as a result, in this response, end up committing suicide via prolonged lockdown. People are dying in thousands there as a consequence. I just gave you statistics that at least 1,000 dies of malaria a day. We are growing. Almost about similar number dies of HIV. If you put all the other ones together, there are probably more than 1 million such deaths as a result of diseases and infections and so on in Nigeria alone in a year. and we were growing. Now, this one, put up the other bit. That's why we want to save all lives. Whether you lock down or you don't lock down, unfortunately, painful as it is, people are dying. Even if you lock everybody in their homes, lock them on what is going on with regards to the other aspect of death, of people dying of malnutrition, hunger, related, they have no cash to even treat their malaria and typhoid, and so on and so forth. There's probably more thousands dying that we don't have the statistics out there. And again, for Africa, let's also face the statistics. The study, and the study by Yale University has pointed out about the demographic nature of this disease. The people who fall mostly under that 5% that are mostly component are the elderly and those with underlying. Mostly. Everybody can get it. Those who are at risk are this. Africa, fortunately, has only 3% of population in this, what we might call the senior citizens. The average age in Africa is 20. What the studies are showing, and with the WHO data also showing that over 80% will be asymptomatic or mild and will get over it anyway. So it's not so much about the number of infections. Globally, Ruben, to today, there are more people dying out of malaria in a year in Nigeria than coronavirus has killed in the entire world. Question is, and this is still going to this all the numbers on the table so that you have a balanced view. That's all we're asking. And that if you take a binary, narrow view of it, oh, coronavirus and this and that, and so on, and people have died. In the entire Africa, it's 1,400. Fortunately, may their souls rest in peace. We need to lose 1,400 after the month. But guess what? Every day is dying out of other diseases. And we haven't locked down because of that. It's a question of how do you get the people to eat? Because there is a link between nutrition and health. And this has been a missing link. African countries can't afford to feed their people under this. You were just showing what was going on in Lake, and the guy just repeated what is in my article. Namely, that there are thousands or millions that I need. Africa, 1.3 billion people. And only maybe 2 to 5% can afford a lockdown. Feed themselves. The others, malnourished, immune system down, and there are thousands dying every day unreported.
Professor Soludo,
just
certainly.
As a consequence.
And this is you pointed out something extremely important here. You said Africa may be afraid of death, but we may end up committing suicide. And the honest truth is, like you said, yes, we are coupled with other issues, malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, the list goes on. And we do have to look for the African solution to the African problem. Now, we only have about 15 minutes left of this conversation, Professor. So I'd like us to move on to another topic of conversation. And that's because there's a lot of volatility, of course, in the oil markets right now. And I'd like us to analyze or see where that leaves a country like Nigeria, because some analysts are saying, and I quote, that this is an opportunity to stop digging when one finds himself in a trench and implement reforms in the areas such as productivity, areas such as the ease of doing business, and also foreign exchange controls. But how amenable do you think African governments are to these changes that clearly are needed measures?
Well, you have already listed. Yeah, I guess in my article I also said the way countries are going to respond with how they interpret the crisis. If they think of it as temporary, as many want to do, they will think, okay, out of the crisis. And then if you think it's a structural shift, then you get on to the fundamentals. For example, and as I said before, I wouldn't want to be dragged. I know you will try hard, but wouldn't want to be dragged discussing Nigeria specific issues because I have a platform to be able to on that. But if you kind of think carefully, we think and we agree that we're actually in a transition phase, a post-oil economy. What are the gamut of our political institutional arrangements are all designed to share and consume oil money. Then it basically means you're going to be fundamental structural institutional redesign of the country for an effective transition post-oil world. So since you say you have 15 minutes, let's get on to your other questions. Please.
Well, let's talk about the new normal that everyone is talking about, post-COVID-19. And that new normal would be part of the outcome of lessons that we have learned from this terrible experience. We're likely to see a lot more reliance on the digital economy. But is Africa prepared for this post-COVID-19 reality, for the new normal, in terms of capacity, in terms of infrastructure? And do you see greater investment in the ICT sector across Africa as a fallout?
Well, there will be if it makes business sense. And I believe it does. But one thing I flag it off, this is a big subject. Africa must seriously deal with the orchestrated superstition against 5G technology. Because we want to be part of the technology world. Actually, that's our future. With the advantage of our demographics, like I said, the average age of 20, youthful population, technology is the language of the future, is a tool of the future. It is the future, actually. And therefore, I see Africa with its 1.3 billion population as still continuing to be a land of opportunities. So yes, there could be investments are warranted, whether we have the and countries that have got the enabling environment, regulatory ease of doing business, and to be able to attract capital, long-term capital, will obviously experience.
Thank you, Professor Soludo. Now, also in Africa's financial markets, we also do expect to see a lot of value destruction on a large scale. So I want to ask you, what do companies need to do to turn this around into value creation?
You want me to begin? I think the only thing I can say to you, maybe that one, I forgot to answer you that I'll send you a check afterwards after this. More seriously speaking, yes, we're going to find quite a lot of that. The only point I will leave you with this bit is that Africa remains a land of opportunity. Never might happen. $0.6 trillion economy, slightly less than France. Okay. Potentials are quite huge. That will be destruction, creative destruction. That will be several sectors will die. There are huge opportunities for value creation. The virgin land, as it were. And I want to believe that over 400 companies make an annual revenue in excess of $1 billion a year, each of them. The future is here, whether it is in terms of the solid mineral sector, whether it is in agriculture, whether it's in technology, manufacturing, especially light manufacturing, and so on. That is the place to be. Strategy to do that, let's get on to a strategy session, a different place venue than the 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
Well, I mean, in your article, I would like to take you back to a point you made in your article. You said that African countries do not even have the leg room to print money. And the IMF only last week in its webinar on Africa was suggesting that perhaps, quantitative easing is the way out of the crisis that we face. Why do you think that, we have no leg room for quantitative easing in Africa?
Well, very simple. Quantitative easing to reduce aggregate supply, put it in the system that is probably in a deep hole. Then quantitative isn't to be able to stimulate the economy. But when many of the African was precarious external position, doing quantitative easing in that world requires quite a bit of heavy lifting. You have foreign reserves falling, your currencies are depreciating, you have rising inflation, negative net external position, and you then want to increase money supply under the circumstance. You got getting the number quite difficult. So you got to be clear in your mind. Where do you want to place? I mean, each country will have to decide where do they want to prioritize. Like I said, many of these countries are in a stage of already stagflation, with net negative external position. Depreciating currencies. You pump in more money, your currency will also come under heavy price.
Thank you, Professor. Now, I'd also like to bring up...
Yeah.
Sorry, Professor, do go on.
Go on. Hello?
Hello, Professor, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, Professor, sorry, you were making a point.
I was just, I've wrapped up. I've just said, because he asked why I thought.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Now,
enough leg room.
sorry, the audio is still a technical glitch that we're trying to deal with here. But now, while warning that the descent has not really stopped, I mean, some economists like McKinsey and other companies are predicting that Africa is going to go through a mild U-shaped curve in terms of economic recovery. However, some are also predicting that we may see more of a W-shaped curve if we are to have a resurgence of cases across Africa. What is your take on these particular analyses?
Well, my take is that a U or a W or 10 or 5 or just one W would just depend on what you do. And, you know, what people say, Africa. I just remind them they're talking about 54 different. Each of them with their, they are similar as they are different, with each of them with their peculiarity. Some have some bigger leg rooms, but it will also depend on what they do today in response to this the coronavirus thing. If they think of it as a binary, a sequential thing, we first of all finish with the coronavirus and pandemic, then we come back again and deal with the economy. Then there is no opportunity. No, you are not exploiting. You are not taking any advantage of this in an opportunistic way. Don't forget, for example, whether we avoid even a depression, like I said, depends on what we strategically do today. China isolated Wuhan, but kept Shanghai, Beijing, and some of its other major powerhouses open. And today, they opportunistically position themselves that today, while the world is locking down, they're the ones supplying the world and reckoning billions and hundreds of billions of dollars. China is projected to still grow positively at about 2.5 when everyone else will be in recession. Very smart. So it depends. That's why I talk about African countries also opportunistically positioning themselves. Think differently, think without the box, to see how do we tackle the twin pandemic, given our local realities, in such a manner that we can also position ourselves to take advantage of the rest of the world. And so, for example, whether you have a U curve or a multiple W curve or whatever, on the aggregate, I said, depends on what we do, and depends also what the D3 countries are going to do. What will happen to tourism? What will happen to remittances? Nigeria alone projected, PwC estimates, Nigeria is expected to receive probably about $30 billion. Now, with COVID-19, Africa will probably lose about. So what is going to happen to tourism? What's going to happen to oil? All this will have consequences as well for how quickly will recover. But more fundamentally, when your country is facing a terms of trade and supply shocks, you must allow nominal variance, including the real effective exchange rate. It has to. You delay that and you have incomplete adjustments, many of these countries might get deeper, not just recession, but depression. So my summary thing is that we're not going to ride it. Each country will have to find its own debt. But on the aggregate as well, we must fast-track the arrangements to deepen integration of Africa as one large market. Can you imagine the entire 54? In economic terms, it's less than France. And France, in the order of things in the world.
Prof, you were governor of the central bank, and I guess it would be in order to ask you a question about the Nigerian banks here, the health of Nigerian banks. Now, do you think that Nigerian banks will be able to withstand the effect of the pandemic? And do you think that there are certain steps that they need to take in terms of restructuring their operations and making sure that their books are healthy, both during the period of the pandemic and after?
Ruben, that's really, I can now tell who my friends are. You're asking me that kind of question. I'm sure you didn't mean that I should answer that kind of question. I think the premise of your question that I want to be a former governor of central bank, I'm sure you will understand that that effectively precludes that I will be making comments balance sheets of Nigerian banks. So I will say, for now and for this particular forum, I will pass.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Charles Soludo. We've had a very engaging conversation with you this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you very much indeed.